You're between two dumbbells. I'm your host, Skip Hill. I'm bringing over 40 years of bodybuilding experience to the table, and I'm joined today, as always, by the educated meathead. I did it backwards on purpose. Dr. Marv. And thankfully, he's bringing a big brain to the operation. For each show, we'll posit a thought about training exercise or training methodology. Then we take a big, deep dive into the deep end, and we wrestle with the minutia. We might argue, debate, pull hair, or call each other names, but at the end of the day, when the dust settles, we decide if we would smash or pass. It's important to note we started last show by giving away some free stuff. So I want to remind everybody that every time you comment on the YouTube video after the show, you'll be included in a drawing at the end of each month to receive a Team Skip t-shirt from the Team Skip store of your choosing, and also receive Dr. Marv's online training bodybuilding anatomy course. To be fair, this is important. The comments on YouTube need to be more than just for the algo to be considered for the monthly drawing. We'll post the winner for that month on our IG accounts, and we will also reach out to the winner via their YouTube account. Got to let them know if they win.
Absolutely.
Sit back and go, we're going to keep the free stuff. They didn't reach out. They should have reached out. All right, today we're going to posit. We're going to dive into our posit first, but we're also going to do a follow-up. We have a couple questions from, and this is cool. We're starting to get a pretty good, there's a lot of interaction. There's a lot of interest in the show, and we're hearing this through the grapevine. You're hearing this at the meets that you go to, things like that. And everything, for the vast majority of feedback, it's incredibly positive, and I love that. It's very, very exciting. So we're starting to get questions now and a lot more feedback, and we want to be able to answer some of those questions after our second edition of Intimate Time with Dr. Marv and Skip. And we'll touch on that. If you did not see that from the last show, we'll explain that real quick when we get to the segment. But it's essentially a little bit of insight into who we are if you don't know anything about Skip. In my brain, I'm a legend.
I am the one, the way your son don't need a gun to get respect up on the street.
I think everybody knows who Skip is. Like, I don't use my last name, right? It's just Skip. Like, you don't know who I am. And Dr. Marv, I mean, if someone Googled Dr. Marv, would there not be 22 pages that come up on Google?
Of course.
With your picture, your physique, there will be eventually. There may not be yet, but there will be eventually. In the meantime, we're doing the Intimate Time so that the viewers and the listeners can have a little bit of insight into what we do outside of. Do we do anything outside of this industry? Sometimes it feels like we don't do anything, but this will maybe even remind us that we do things that sometimes are not bodybuilding related, and we want to kind of, I don't know, get intimate, I guess, with the viewers.
Mm-hmm.
Do I take the posit, or you want to take it?
Your turn.
All right, my turn. I'm going to posit, and this is a good one. I always say they're a good one. You know what? They're all good. Mm-hmm. They're at least good for now because all of our good ideas are at the top of the list.
Yeah, tune in 6 months from now when we're running out.
We'll be really struggling for a good topic. So here's the posit. I think that the pendulum squat blows away the hack squat. I'm not going to say that the hack squat is useless, I lived on that exercise for years with great progress. And I always hung, and this is a true story, I always hung my gym bag on the pendulum squat because no one used it. This is circa 99, 98. And I trained at a gym that was 48,000 square feet. Awesome. Arguably one of the best equipped gyms I've ever trained at in Aurora, Colorado, called Better Bodies. And there was so much equipment. And at that time, nobody used a pendulum. You hung your bag on the pendulum so that you could then use the hack squat, or the 4 hack squats that were there, all different hack squats. I think, and that's the part that's kind of funny to me, is we didn't use it. We didn't really care for it. I always thought it was kind of like a sissy squat, stupid, girly exercise, that sort of thing. In my, I don't know, what do they call that? The toxic masculinity phase. Mm-hmm. I was in my early 30s. I don't know. Anyway, then to transition into the pendulum and go, what was I doing? So I find that it's vastly superior, yet both have benefits. Your thoughts?
3 years ago, I would have said hack squats every single day, but as I continue to get older and more beat up, I could see the argument. So there's a lot to unpack there.
Well, and I think too, let's be fair, not every hack squat is the same.
No.
Most pendulums are, though. So, then you have to take into account, does the platform adjust on both the hack squat and on the pendulum? Because with the pendulum, a lot of them for years were locked in. I think only recently, and when I say recently, 5, 8, maybe 10 years, has there really been an adjustable platform? And I've only used one once.
Mm-hmm.
Arsenal, I believe.
Yeah, the Arsenal's the one. Yep.
Or a knockoff Arsenal. But but outside of that, the old school pendulums did not adjust. The only thing you were going to adjust was your foot position. And it was funny because there was always that. And this is what I think threw me initially. There's an arrow pointing up going glutes, and there's an arrow pointing down on the platform saying quads. And I'm like, if you have to explain to me how to use this just might not be terribly beneficial. And as a bodybuilder in the early 2000s, and a younger, dumber, guy, when you have to emphasize that, or you put glutes in there, not only glutes on a bodybuilder. And then 15 years later, all bodybuilders are doing adductor work, glute work. Like we missed the boat or something. And you can see it in the physiques, but that's, in the different look, I guess. And we talked about that a lot. Last episode, which was great. If you have not seen the last episode, do check it out. I think there's just a ton of valuable information in there. And I say that because, again, we're legends. So there's that. But it's also the feedback that we got saying, hey, they didn't say you guys are legends. I was pretty disappointed by that. But they did say this is great information, and you're getting the same feedback. So check that out if or when you have time. When you have time, you'll have time. It's worth it. In the meantime, let's dive into it. You want to go with the hack squat first? You want to go with the pendulum first? What do you want to do with this?
Yeah, let's do, why don't we do the hack squat? Because there's also multiple variations with banding that I don't think a lot of people understand. And then we'll talk about pendulum, and then we'll decide which one we favor.
Like it.
So hack squat, and we're talking, let me be very clear, we're talking about a hack squat with pads on your shoulders, because I am not a fan of the linear hack squat where you're sitting in it. Just never been a fan, never will be. Nobody could ever tell me otherwise. But a good hack squat where there's pads on your shoulders, hopefully an adjustable platform, which still to this day, not every company sells one with an adjustable platform, which I still don't understand, but to each their own. It's probably the GOAT when it comes to just purely loading your quads, right? So it's a great quad builder. We know that. Why I might have been changing my tune as of late is a couple reasons. One, there's a lot more shearing force on both the knee joint and compressive force on your spine compared to a pendulum, which when I was younger, I didn't give a damn. I got stupid strong in hack squats. My quads blew up. I love them. My Widowmaker days on hack squats were my favorite highlight of the week, where you would get nervous the night before. I might even play a short video of one of those later. So in terms of just purely loading the quads, it's great. Now, there is a lot of variation when it comes to hack squats, especially the angle of the sled, so to speak. So like the first generation, Cybex, that's a 45-degree angle, if not even steeper, like 50, 55 degrees. And those are heavy as hell, which is why if you ever go to a gym that has, say, an Arsenal, which is more decline compared to the old school Cybex, which is more vertical, 90% of folks are going to the Arsenal because they could load it up a hell of a lot more. I know I did when I first started hack squatting. So if you know how to do some just basic, I believe it's geometry of, taking the angle of the sled and doing some math, a 45-degree angle leg press or hack squat, well, you're actually, your legs are receiving 70% of the load. But as soon as you decline it slightly to just 35 degrees, right? So 10 degrees less, that goes all the way down to 57% of the load. So the steepness of the 70% angle
of the what?
The actual load. So say you were putting 100 pounds of weight on each side. On a 45-degree angle, you're getting 70 pounds. On a 35-degree angle, you're getting 57 pounds.
Fair enough. So I wanted to emphasize that you said load 3 times.
And cue Peter Griffin. Yes. So that does matter. Again, when you're young, you want to load up for the gram. It's freaking awesome. Like I love those sessions. but there's some downsides. One, yes, a lot more shearing force on the knee, a lot more compressive force on the spine. When you're Gumby, it doesn't matter, but as you keep doing it more and more. Also, now I'm to a point where I don't want to have to load up 5, 6, 7 plates aside. I just don't. I want the machine room to have to load less. Now, when I was younger, that is nails on a chalkboard. You couldn't convince me to do a pendulum. Well, I mean, let's be real. I barely train legs outside of leg extensions and leg press, but that's a different story for another day. But with the pressure on you, especially if you're doing super hardcore, intense Widowmaker sets a la Dante Trudel, when somebody looks over and they literally think you're trying to kill yourself because the set's lasting 3, 4, 5, 6 minutes, it's pretty common to get a really nasty exertional headache because you're having that sustained compression force on the traps. And that could be like terrifying because it is the worst amount of pain you've ever felt. Base of your skull, could be the temple, sometimes it's behind the eyes. So that is a big downside of that, is if you are, and it seems like somebody will be able to do a hack squat for years and years and years, and something will switch, and then they're going to be prone to having those happen, which is never fun, right? And that's terrifying. So some people will even just go away from hacks just because of the headache thing. But what's really trendy now is banding. Whether do you reverse band it, do you band it traditionally, or do you leave a band out of it?
When it comes to banding, I'm here's the funny thing. I always rolled my eyes at banding and chains. This is how I felt about it. They play a huge role from a powerlifting standpoint in my mind. And always did, but not as much from a hypertrophy bodybuilding standpoint. In fact, I thought this is an incredibly laborious task, very complicated, and it especially even when it comes to chains. I don't want to go down the chains thing, rabbit hole too much, but it throws off balance and stuff. For powerlifting and for stabilizer work, it's great. For hypertrophy work, I just don't want to fight that balance any more than I need to. Obviously, chains on a hack are completely different. Chains on squatting, things like that. So let's go back to the band, stay on track. Again, it was an eye roll to me because I thought it's making the exercise, making the hack squat easier in the position that I want it to be harder, in that bottom position. Until I realized one day when there was a band on the hack squat already, Gen 1, which is absurdly heavy. I've herniated my same L4, L5 9 times. Not recently. It's been 9 years. There's a lot of 9s here. Maybe 9 is my lucky number. I've been injury-free for 9 years. Saw it on there and I thought, you know what? Let's just try it today. It's already there. I'm going to see what it feels like. Probably not going to be much different, or it's going to be really light in the bottom position. I'm going to be like, yeah, no, and just pull it off. And I noticed that and we touched on this in a past episode, with intrathecal and intra-abdominal pressure was lower in that bottom position. And I still felt that it didn't take away as much resistance from that bottom position that I thought, especially obviously as you go heavier. So I kept it on, and I have to say, I decided to keep them. And since that day, and this has only been, if I'm being honest, only about 3 months. So for the last 3 months, I have changed my position. It happens, even after training for 41 years, and you have those things that you kind of build up in your head and you go, I'm not going to do that. I've already shelved that. But this is a good example of something, of a situation where sometimes you shelve something and you need to come back and revisit it, even if you shelved it years ago, because you may be in a different position where you could find value and use in something that you set aside a while ago. And this is one of those things. So for me to be able to lighten that resistance mildly in the bottom position, to take away that pressure from a potential vulnerability, being my lower back, is a big confidence boost, for one. Two, I don't have that anywhere near as much of a concern or worry in that bottom position, because anytime I had one of those issues I had was hack squatting, coming out of the hole, and it just popped. And I always say it's like getting kicked in the balls. It hurts initially, but you know that it's going to get really bad. And the anxiety, once it happens a couple times, that anxiety builds, and you know what's coming, and it is not good. So I ban them now. I don't want to say ridiculously heavy, but heavy enough to notice it. And the other thing I think that needs to be noted is the resistance at the top. A lot of people think the knees are the most vulnerable in the bottom position. The knees are the way that I know it, and you correct me if you don't feel the same way. The knees are in the most vulnerable position about 2/3 of the way up. So that is my thought. There are times where I was rehabbing my knee where I was able to do things like hacks or linear squats, and I would stay in that bottom 2/3 position, even start with the carriage at the bottom, so that I didn't have to mess at all with that top 1/3 of the movement. And that helped me to move through that knee problem because I could train legs without irritating the articular cartilage damage or osteoarthritis inflammation that I was dealing with at that time. So the point being, it gets heavier towards the top. There's a lot of stress there in that top 1/3. So you don't want to miss out too much on that full range of motion. I'm not saying that you need to lock out at every rep, but I think it's important there's value in both, I guess. Staying in that bottom position obviously will keep constant tension, and you can still miss out on that top 1/3 portion where the weight really is, in my opinion, the heaviest. And that's whether it's banded or not.
Yeah, that's valid. If I had to pick a certain degree of knee flexion that's most worrisome, it's probably around 90 degrees just because of the ACL has its most laxity there.
Okay, fair enough. So we're not on the same page there.
But then 60 degrees is important for MCL. 90, like every ligament has different ranges of motion, right?
Okay.
So that's going to be based on your injury history and all a bunch of stuff, right? Here's how I used to reverse band it, which was heavy. So a couple things. One, you want to get to where you have the most amount of knee flexion possible. Ideally, your hamstrings are resting on your calves in the bottom. Please stop doing quarter reps. You're not mistaking anybody. I actually want my heels on the platform so I could drive up through my heels. If you lose, hack squat, what happens when you hit failure? Normally, you get up on your toes, your heel comes off the platform. You can no longer really leverage your quads as much as possible because the quads require heel contact to allow your knee to rotate, to allow yourself to get output. So you want to make sure your heels are staying flat on the platform. If people did not watch the bracing video or podcast from the last one, episode 5, I believe, watch that because bracing is huge. But again, it's full control as deep as you can. You better be pretty much bottoming out the machine. I'm big on continuous reps. That's me personally. I know that's another topic for another day, but that's how I used to reverse band it, with using a single green monster band. Everybody who's using 2 or 3 monster bands to take you from a 1 plate per side hack squatter to a 5 plate per side, you are just looking kind of silly, in my opinion, because we know you can't do that anyways. Now I will band a hack squat with just that right there. So a medium band.
Okay.
Yep. So that's the big change there. One thing I want to show is,
while you're doing that, let me just add, I refuse to use those metal connectors, and I'll tell you why. I haven't banded enough stuff that in my brain, if that band were to give, and I know it's not going to, but if that band gives, taking a band to the head or the arm or the shoulder or the neck is one thing. Taking what do they call them? Harbinger? Yeah. To the head is not something I want to do and not see it coming because it's behind me. That is in my brain until probably I get more comfortable and have a little bit more time under my belt with that, using the resistance.
Yeah. And so that's totally valid. 100%. I feel safer doing that versus stretching out a band if it has like a hard edge on it. But what is the goal of reverse banding? You're taking just a little bit of tension off your knees and a little bit of tension off your back in the very bottom position. You're not doing it to where, like, here's what I would recommend doing. Put whatever band you want to put on it and then unrack the empty sled. That sled should still go to the bottom.
Oh, yeah.
If you have 2 or 3 monster bands, it's going to move 2 to 3 inches.
And what are you really accomplishing with that other than
you're stroking your ego for the gram.
and it's more energy to load and unload those plates anyway.
Yep.
And don't be the guy. I tell you, this is like the ultimate crime. If you're going to load them up so that you have to load more plates with a thicker resistance band or more resistance bands and you leave those weights,
Yep.
not good. That's not going to go over well with your bro community in the gym.
If I overopen a gym, I will charge people by the pound if they leave weights
I
on.
like that.
So you only will leave the leg press or hack squat loaded once or twice, and you'll never do it again.
Exactly. And you know who gets stuck with that? The girl behind the desk.
Yep.
Who weighs 105 pounds, and the poor girl has to walk around and take care of everybody's plates.
Yep.
It's horrible.
Yep. Now, one other option, though, is actually banding it. So instead of reverse banding, using a band, I learned this, picked this up from a really smart kid, Dalton McIntyre. So I will always give people their due credit. That's something I'm big on. So here I am actually putting a band on it. Now this hack squat's nice where it actually has the legs to be able to band it easily. Not every hack squat has that. But yep. So there it is. The band is pulling me down so everybody could see that. I'm doing that to help with my knee pain. Remember, I have a really, really bad left knee. I'm going to need a knee replacement. I was hoping to make it till 50. I don't think I'm going to. So having to fight the deceleration on the negative actually takes away a lot of my knee pain because it changes mechanics and it changes some loading of different musculature on the way down. So it is advanced, but if you're having knee pain, say you reverse band and you're still having knee pain, obviously the knee. So real quickly, the body alternates between mobile and stable joints. You're supposed to have a mobile ankle, a stable knee, a mobile hip, a stable low back. That pattern goes through your entire body. If you're having knee pain, look at the joints above and below it. So work on your hip mobility, work on your ankle mobility, right? If you saw that video of me doing hack squats and you're like, well, there's no way I could get down there, quit being lazy, look up ankle dorsiflexion drills, right? Because the ability to get as deep as possible in leg training, if you want the biggest legs as possible, that's what you need to do. So you need to work on that, right?
I'm glad you went back to that. That's important because I wanted to go back to the ankle flexion as well.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have a hard time getting those knees far enough comfortably over your foot and having your foot position as essentially you want your foot position as low as possible on the platform that is comfortable so that you can move or shift that stretch or that not the stretch, the stress or the stimulus as much to the quad as possible. And without that ankle mobility, you're going to have a hell of a time doing. There's a lot of mobility issues there when it comes to leg training. Obviously, hamstring, glute, lower back, but the ankle, I wouldn't you agree? It essentially starts at the foot and it goes up from there.
The foot's the driver of the lower body. The rib cage is the driver of the upper body. Unfortunately, with what I do, so for those who don't know, I'm a performance chiropractor in the Houston Bay Area. That's my day job. Nobody looks at the foot. Nobody looks at the rib cage, period. Like, has anybody adjusted your foot? Never. They never even looked at it. What? So now I have significantly damaged my right ankle, like tore it up so bad to where I finally went to the ortho. He's like, dude, I can't tell you what's scar tissue and what's not. My ankle mobility was trash. And if I could restore it to where there was a 4-inch difference at one side, right? So it was incredibly painful. DC calves helped me a ton. Voodoo floss or factor floss helped me a ton. Shockwave, sustained loaded stretching, like very painful. But if I could work on that and pretty much get my dorsiflexion, so dorsiflexion is toes up, to be pretty damn near even. Now, plantar flexion toes down, still totally different. That's why my right calf will always be smaller than my left calf, even though most people's right calves are larger because of driving. If I could get my ankle dorsiflexion to be better, to where people comment all the time, like, my knees and hips can't do what you do. If I could do that, anybody can do that. So work on your damn ankles. But going back to what we started this conversation with, the band is advanced, but the band could be a way while you're working on your ankle mobility, your hip mobility, making sure the knee's rotating, right? Because the knee has to rotate. That's why you need to have pressure through your heel when you're coming out of the hole. Having a band that pulls you down to have to decelerate can actually be a nice little hack. And once again, I could load less plates up because now, personally, when I'm doing hacks, I am, as of right now, supersetting it with the pendulum. I mean, not the pendulum, the somersault squat that we showed. That combo is, I mean, your quads are so full of blood. It's like, I'm like, how am I going to drive home? It's awesome. So should you band it? Starting out, I would say probably not. But you have two options. Reverse banding is to take a tiny amount of load off, like Skip said, about his knees and his low back. You're not doing it to take 2 plates aside to turn it to 6, just so you could feel good about yourself. And then banding it is a way to change the loading mechanics a little bit, but probably help with a little bit of lower body joint pain.
Okay, now as a listener, I'm thinking this because I'm listening to you.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I'm obviously doing the show with you. I don't see in my tiny little brain how the difference in banding from the top or the bottom is any different, because you're essentially lowering the resistance no matter which way you do it. You're decreasing the resistance in that bottom position. But when I think about it more, it's going to depend on how far the resistance band is stretched.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So when you band it at the top, there doesn't seem to be as much, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm trying to see this in my head, even though I do it, I don't give it this much thought. It doesn't seem to stretch as much as if it were in the bottom. And I go by the picture because, so it's going to depend on where that loads from. Like as an example, if you loaded that same resistance band that you used, was it purple, I believe, in the picture? Green. Okay. If you actually wrap that, and don't do it, anybody listening, but if you wrap that around the platform, then that would be even more of a stretch. So I can see where that would be more resistance. Then you move, or you can move it back to where you had it connected, or you could essentially take it away and there's none. But the point is the longer that stretch for the resistance band, the more the resistance is going to be decreased. But I just can't see the difference with, if they were equal as far as the stretch, that one is any different than the other. Make me see that. Can you, or is that just...
So also, that was my first ever time doing a banded hack squat, because he and I took a Zach Couples course together, and super smart kid. He's going to Chiro school himself. So like, obviously he and I were like, oh, cool. We're alike. We just paired off and hung out and picked each other's brain the whole time. Now I am putting the band farther forward so where there's more stretch the entire time. One is pulling. So yes, I get what you're saying. When I have the band anchored up top, it's taking away a little bit of pressure at the bottom, right? But it's not necessarily increasing pressure at the top. If I switch it, the band's down, so I'm banding it, not reverse banding it. It's increasing tension as I go up. So the increasing tension up top, as the resistance profile is already starting to drop off from the machine, is what loads the knee joint and musculature a little bit more, which will help with something called proprioception, which is your brain knowing where something is in space without looking at it, right? So if I'm waving my hand to the left, I already know where it is without having to look. It's doing stuff like that, which then decreases my pain signaling.
Okay, fair enough. And I have one more question about the inflexibility, and that is this. Yep. Is there a potential risk of rupturing your Achilles if there is low, very, very low, or a lack of flexibility when you're doing something like a hack squat? Or is that really not, like, it will limit your ability to keep the heel down, but it may not necessarily be a risk for injuring, or is there a risk of injury?
I mean, possibly, but nothing screams
nothing
at
high.
me.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
No. Yeah, you would have typically an Achilles injury. I think we talked about it on the leg curl episode. Typically that happens with something called triple extension, where your ankle, your knee, and your hip are all extending into extension at the same time, and that's what tears it. So that really wouldn't happen on a hack squat. Now, of course, anything can happen.
Sure. Oh, absolutely.
But
it's not a high possibility.
Yeah, no.
Okay. And so one more thing I want to touch on before we move to the pendulum is this. The platform position, as far as whether it's an open angle, whether it's a neutral angle, and neutral just basically, I guess I would assume, would be more like a 90 versus an open, or versus even closed. And I can't see any reason to do a closed angle, but whatever. We see that a lot on leg presses where you can get it up, past that 90 degrees. I'm a big fan of the open angle. How open do you want to go And it may be personal more than it is, EMG studies or anything like that. But I like it open a little bit, but not too open. So as an example, if we go from 90 and we open it 1 or maybe even 2 clicks, that's about as far as I want to go. Are we in the same ballpark there, or do you have different ideas?
Yeah, because it's going to be highly variable on your ankle mobility. Also, like you and I have different depth in our hip socket bony structure, so that's going to change things. So I think, yes, I typically, if I have access to one that's adjustable, I'm one pass, just like you, because it takes away some of my ankle issues because I still have a little bit of restriction on the right, but you don't want it to open your feet or sliding because that would be catastrophe. So don't make sure you have figured out which angle you need before you really start loading the damn thing. I mean, I've never heard of anybody's feet sliding off of it, but I also don't want to be like it can never happen. But that's really, really variable. I've seen somebody try to use a band to hold a squat wedge on the platform, and that scared the hell out of me.
Okay, so taking into consideration, like I said, I want to touch on that angle, open angle, that sort of thing. Let's move to the pendulum, and I mean, let's just dive in. This one is my favorite, and I almost wish I had those years. The hacks were good to me. They were probably my most important, or the exercise for quads that I relied on the most for my quad development. And I thought they worked really, really well for me until I hit the pendulum. And I hit the pendulum at the right time by accident. Because I feel that, and not everybody agrees with me on this, but at least with my back injury or injuries over time, the pendulum is far more lower back friendly for me. One of the things that I do, and I think it depends on the backrest big time. The reason I say that is this: I like the shorter backrest to where the bottom of the pad kind of rests against my SI. And what that does is it allows me, because remember, when we touched on this, or I touched on this when we were talking about legs in the last show, is one of my cues before I start a set is I tell myself to roll my hips, roll your hips tight, keep tight, that sort of thing. But I roll my hips so that my ass is not directly under me. And you explained that I do that to kind of correct my posture to where it's actually in line or lined up in neutral for me by doing that. So, and that's something that I do with the pendulum as well. And in doing that, that drives that pad into right around my SI. And I'm almost visually cued to drive, as I'm coming out of the hole, my lower back into the pad versus the idea of I'm driving upward. So it's kind of I guess the best way to explain it is, to me, the pendulum is a drive out of the hole that's back and up versus the hack squat just being a drive upward. Are we on the same? Yeah. Are we looking at it the same way?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think if you ask most people who've been doing this for a long time, I think most people started with hacks, built a hell of a lot of size and strength, and then realized, man, this is like getting into a car wreck every time I train hacks by the end, right? Like, hacks take a lot out of you because it's so stable. It allows for high output. By output, I mean how hard you're pushing in proximity to failure. So I think most people, right, have the same story that you and I have. Hacks built a lot of size, and then pendulums blew up. And then being more advanced, realized, wait a second, I could use 1/3 of the load and arguably get a better stimulus on my quads, but more importantly, take away a lot of the compressive shearing force on both the knee and both the low back, right? It's that the catch-22 of what somebody's doing now isn't how they got to be where they are. Whether it's training, nutrition, supplementation, everybody knows what I'm talking about. Like, what you're doing to maintain is not doing what you did to get there. So I think that's really important. I call hack squats the GOAT for just pure quad engagement recruitment. But the GOAT of a pure lengthened position movement is the pendulum, and it's nicknamed the Humbler, which is why I never would have used it when I was younger too, exactly. Right? Like, so in terms of pure loading the quads in a pure lengthened position movement, nobody comes close to it, right? But with that said, that also means grinder reps are damn near impossible versus a hack squat. You could get 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 grinders, you might get 1, maybe 2 grinders on a pendulum if you're going deep enough. Once again, to each their own, but I'm not overly impressed when I see somebody have 6 or 7 plates on the pendulum and they're only going to 90-degree bend. Like, you're stopping right before it gets actually hard. I would much rather have full ass to grass, hamstrings resting on your calves. No, you're not going to be able to load it as much. Like, I think my all-time best after, was maybe 3.5 total plates for 15 reps after doing blood flow restriction. And that's a hell of a lot of load on a pendulum, right? And that was me at my strong 3.5 total, right? So yeah, it takes a lot of load off. Now you could add a band to increase tension at the top because that's when it gets easier. But I don't do that unless I have a training partner or a spotter because I'm already going to get buried anyways. Right. And so I never really found the need personally, even though I know people do.
Yeah. And that's a difficult exercise to do without a spotter if you're going to go close to failure.
Yes.
Because a lot of times, and not everybody's the same, so I understand this, but you should pull out the stopper at the bottom. Because if the stopper is up, you're just, I would say maybe 10% of people are going to be in that range of motion and not hit the stopper. You need that to be out of the way. And once it's out of the way and you fail, good luck getting out of there. It's not good. And if you have a history of lower back issues, it can be quite frightening.
Yes.
So you want somebody close. Sometimes I'll say, if my wife isn't there, I'll just tell somebody I don't need a spot. But if you hear me crying and yelling, get me out, get me out of here, at least be open to coming over and pulling the weight off of me so that I can get out. And they just usually laugh and they might pay attention. And the funny thing, rarely do I get caught. I've trained for a long time. I have a really good idea of where that threshold is. And pendulum is not something that I want to take to failure anyway. So I want to get as close as I can. And when that last rep is crawling to the top, then I'll slow it down even more. I'm one of those that as the rep gets closer to the finished position, and I know that I have just broken the sticking point, I will slow it down and I will creep it to the top for just that added extra stimulus. So, and I'm not a big guy as far as banding on that. I banded on the hack squat, but I won't on the pendulum. Let me ask you this, and I don't know that you know this. I'm kind of putting you on the spot. Have you seen any EMG studies, even though it's not the end all be all? And I realize that, and I don't want anybody listening to think that I do. But have you seen the EMG results for a typical hack squat, any hack squat for that matter? I know they're going to vary from hack squat to hack squat versus a pendulum. Does the stress change a little bit? As an example, I could see that the rectus femoris, just from a feel standpoint, is going to get hit a bit harder on the pendulum than it is on a hack squat. Which is funny because if my quad tendons are going to bother me a little bit or be a little tight, it's going to be on the hack and not the pendulum. So I can kind of see how logically, but again, correct me if I'm wrong, that there's more vastus medialis and vastus lateralis on a hack versus a pendulum. Do you agree with that or am I off on that?
So I couldn't really find anything EMG wise because they haven't really done all that. So from a feel standpoint, yeah. So what did you say again? Give me the rundown again.
I feel that there's more vastus lateralis and medialis involvement on a hack than there is on a pendulum. I feel it shift, or the stress shift, a little bit more in favor of the rectus femoris on a pendulum versus the hack squat. Okay. Yeah. If you think it's like the opposite, like how could you feel that different? Then that's cool. That's what I've always felt.
Yeah, because you're still in a kind of a flex position more at the top of a pendulum than a hack squat when you're totally straight. So that'll obviously like kind of keep the rec fem a little bit shorter. So that's probably why you feel it shifted out. Yeah. In case people didn't know this, you cannot prioritize your quad sweep versus your teardrop based on your foot angle. It's a common tendon, so you're going to put a lot of stress. With that said, though, I do think the teardrop does get recruited better when you're going to full depth right? So I do think depth will kind of dictate the stretch on the muscle, which might help prioritize it. But you can't prioritize one or the other. The only thing that you can prioritize is maybe rec fem versus the rest of the quad, because the rec fem crosses the hip joint. That's why it acts differently. That's why in a Bulgarian split squat, what's the most sore the next day? The top of the quad, because it crosses the hip joint when no other doesn't. That's a loaded stretch position. That's why it's brutal. So because it crosses the hip joint, that's why you feel it a little bit more. Because if you think about it, I'm still kind of in not a full-blown leg extension position, but my hip's still slightly flexed. So there's more shortening of the muscle, which is why you feel that.
Well, and that's kind of what I logically was thinking. It's the drive back. That
because you have this arc, and that's what takes up so much shearing force off the knee and the low back. It also makes it really, really hard. I could see that. I couldn't find anything. If listeners could find something great, please include it. But I didn't see something specific for that, because I really think hardcore bodybuilding's so in love with pendulums. But the average person, like, how many times have you seen somebody at your gym try the pendulum for the first time and they start with a plate, and I'm like, oh god, do I tell them? Like, you see them bury it, they climb out, they sheepishly take the weight off, and then they go to their favorite leg press.
My favorite, when I was training clients briefly for about 2.5 years, high-end clients at Titan Gym in Fort Lauderdale, made a lot of money, had a lot of fun. I only quit doing it because I moved to West Palm and I had lost a couple clients and I didn't want to rebuild it. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to dive back in 100% to the online thing. And I've missed that a little bit. One of the things, though, that stood out to me, because I had spent more time in the gym at that time, obviously, because I would train when I got done. So I was there for 5-6 hours, sometimes 7 hours in a day. And I got a big laugh out of the guys who would come in and load the counterweight on the pendulum with 4 or 5 plates and have, 1 or 2 in the back. And they just, the pride, the visual, obvious pride that they had in walking around. And obviously they weren't very big, and there's no crime in not being very big. There is, however, a crime in walking around like a peacock with your lats inflated while you feel like you're adding weight to an exercise when you're actually countering that. Now, I think it's important to note, because some people may not know this. You're not going to make it ridiculously light throughout the full range of motion. Really what you're doing is you're taking that resistance off the bottom portion.
Which is the whole point of the damn movement to begin with.
Exactly. Now, I would argue this. It's kind of that front counter position, that counterweight position, is kind of along the lines of a reverse band. It's essentially doing the same thing without banding it. So if you do need, maybe you have a situation that is kind of bizarre or not normal, where you have a knee problem where it bothers you in the bottom position and you don't want that resistance as high, or for whatever reason, your lower back bothers you in that lower position, then something like that, doing that could be beneficial, much like me reverse banding the hack squat to take a little bit of pressure off of my lower back. I don't see the pendulum as a big vulnerability to the lower back, but that doesn't mean that someone else may not have that. Again, based on maybe the backrest is a little bit longer. The one at Titan was a little bit longer. There is that.
Why people make machines. They obviously are 5'5". And I was trying to find a video of it, but I don't really have one. But it's skinny up top and then it gets wide down below. Because I'm 6 foot, that's dumping my low back into that extension position that we want to avoid, hence bracing. And with my low back injury history, that pisses me off. So then I have to use another pad behind my shoulders to try and take that curvature away from it. So if you're taller and you're having low back pain, well, it's dumping you in that extension position that most people don't want. Yeah, I think the counterweight's more for people who can't do it without anything, right? So smaller, newer people, weaker people, I think that's more. I've personally never had access to a pendulum that had a counterweight, so I don't even know what that's like.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. And then I do want to say, if you want a cool, fun way to torture yourself at the end of your leg workout and you're feeling froggy, try a full round of the 30, 15, 15, 15 continuous reps of blood flow restriction on a pendulum after your workout, even with an empty sled. I've never made all 4 rounds uninterrupted. So I'm dropping the challenge gauntlet to anybody.
Right. So let's do this. And again, I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm putting myself on the spot a little bit because I don't want to get this wrong. Let's choose your ideal hack squat and your ideal pendulum as far as manufacturer, like equipment fabricator or manufacturer.
So
start with hack squat.
For hack squat, either an old Body Master, an old Cybex. Just because it's as brutal as it gets and there's no ego lifting. The problem with the old Cybex is there's no adjustable platform.
And it's the drag.
Yeah.
There's so much, like I always laughed and said I could go get a drink at the drinking fountain during the negative and come back and catch it before it got to the bottom because it was so much easier going down and then the drive up. I mean, I don't know. I would have guessed that the Icarian Gen 1 would be the heaviest, but I don't know. That Cybex, it's not the heaviest, but it's got more drag. So, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean,
Cybex, wow.
That's brutal. It's about as brutal as it gets. But probably an old Body Master.
Okay.
Now, good luck finding a large footprint, but I think that's the best bang for your buck. So, yeah, I'll go with that.
I think mine, and this is it's not a specific manufacturer, haven't used one since the Powerhouse on Westnedge in Kalamazoo. I don't even know if it's still there. Hal Shannon owned 3 or 4 of them back in the late 80s and early 90s. They had a hack squat that was damn near straight up. It was just barely inclined, like a high incline.
God.
And the platform was flat to the floor. It was just literally like the thin metal platform, and it was on the floor. But the ball bearings were so smooth. So
nice.
You didn't have to load it up. Like if you got to 2.5 plates on the side, it was pretty heavy, but it was smooth. There wasn't drag. It was just a very, very fluid, good feel. And I've never run into one again. And I'm going to make sure I'm bringing this up right now because I don't want to ask you now, but in a couple minutes, I want to ask you before we change off of this topic and decide whether to smash or pass. I want to ask you about the True Squat. But what about Pendulum then? What about what do you think?
So I've only ever had access to Atlantis and Bolt, and I strongly prefer the Atlantis, but I currently have access to Bolt only.
Okay, I thought the Atlantis had the counterweight on the front.
So if it did, I never noticed it, to be perfectly honest with you.
Maybe it's Paramount and I'm screwing it up. The problem is, funny.
I could be wrong, but I like the Atlantis because it has the adjustable foot platform. So I was a big fan of that.
Okay, then it was not the Atlantis. I'm thinking probably Paramount then.
Okay.
Because I know
I've heard good things about the Paramount. Like
that's the old school one that's been around forever. And it's got a counterweight and you cannot adjust the platform. That's the one that says glutes up and it has an arrow. Put your feet higher on the platform and then quads down with the arrow to kind of give you that very, very rudimentary guideline. So I would go with that old school, the counterweight, the same thing. Probably because I've used it and I'm familiar with it.
Yep.
Let me ask you another question just real quick about the Pendulum. Is it do you consider it? I don't, I'll be honest. I don't consider it an opener. I don't want to go into this exercise cold. I want to be nice and warm and have plenty of blood in there.
Yeah, I agree with you. I typically am doing it after something else. So I will do myo reps or rest pause on the Pendulum. I will not do Widowmakers because you can't grind out. And that just sounds god awful to me. But I only do 2 quad movements per leg day. Usually some sort of blood flow restriction or somersault. Just because I'm so limited with how beat up my knee is, get as much blood and lubrication, and then an all out on right now it's hacks, pendulums, a squat press. I did my first set of Smith squats for the entire year after our episode because I was like, I've kind of realized I missed them.
It's funny, I was considering the same thing.
Yes,
finishing
correct.
It's funny, we're on the same page.
Yeah, my back's finally to a position where I can handle that.
Okay.
But yeah, I would never, because also, yes, our muscles lose the ability to get fully shortened. So like if you are somebody who subscribes to shorten, mid-range, and lengthen position movements, you want to do your shortened positions first because you lose the ability to maintain peak tension in a shortened position. But I find if I go straight to lengthen right away, and there will be some sort of central and peripheral fatigue, which is a whole nother topic for another day that some people really overblow. But I will find, man, if I blast myself super hard going to failure in a lengthened, loaded, stretched position movement, which the quads do grow better from, I'm smoked.
Yeah, I agree. So let's touch on this real quick. The true squat.
Mm-hmm.
I consider it a version of a hack squat. Have you ever used one first?
I've never used one, unfortunately.
I've only used one once.
I've only seen Ben Pollock use it, and he's hilarious to watch when he uses it because he's got the greatest facial expressions ever. It looks brutal. People who are really strong, who I respect, say they absolutely love it. What did it feel like to you?
Incredibly awkward the first couple times I did. They have one, they probably still do, at Armbrust Pro gym in Colorado. And what it is the first time I got under it, I was smart enough to not put any weight on it because I wanted to see the track. Because to get your feet in the correct position, when you start out, if you're in the correct position, you're like, I can't go down from here. Like, it's not going to work. It
looks awkward. Like there's a good amount of steep learning curve.
Yeah. And so as you go down, then of course it kind of shifts back and it allows you to come back as you come down. It takes a minute to really kind of, because it tricks your brain. You're like, I just can't go down. My knees and my legs are going to be in the way. This isn't going to work. So from that, it's almost like the best way to explain it is just a literal straight up and down hack squat. There's not like your back just stays completely at 90 the entire time. And you just go down and you think your legs and everything are going to be in the way. I don't know how else to explain it. And you just slide down and you're like, oh, there's my knees. Like I'm in the right position. It would almost be better to start in the bottom position if you could, because it would at least measure in your brain and it would make sense. Yeah. So it takes a minute to get used to. The only other thing that I don't like about it is, and I'm not terribly strong on legs and on that movement anyway. No one is going to be wowed by the poundages I'm using in the gym on anything, let alone legs. Someone like Dusty, that machine wouldn't be able to hold the weight because it was unstable.
He said he had to stop because it was going to, and I think Ben said the same thing where I'm so strong, it's shifting and it's not worth it.
I remember, I think I saw him do that, or maybe it was even the Pendulum, where I'm like, dude, that well gives, and you're just
when he was adding barbells to hold more weights on stuff, I was like,
you're kind of exceeding the maximum capacity of that machine. And it comes from one side. And so that's always, I talk about my OCDness all the time. I need that, even the Pendulum. I will load those plates on the one side because it's right behind me. I'm only a 2-plate, maybe 2.5. That's heavy for me on a Pendulum, on an old school Pendulum.
It's heavy for anybody.
Yeah. Brutal. So, and I used to wrap, I could get up maybe to 3-plate, but it was super heavy and I can't wrap anymore because of my particular cartilage. It will irritate that issue for my osteoarthritis. Without the knee sleeves, no problem. I can go heavy, doesn't matter. So on that note, let's go with the smasher. This is a harder one.
It is.
It's almost kind of
I feel like I'm cheating.
Yeah, and we have to explain, I think, real quick, why we would smash or pass on both of these. Go for it.
Well, if I could smash or pass on both of them, I smash both. If I have to choose one or the other, I'm going to have a hard time because hacks got me here. But with how flared up everything is, hacks I'm actually kind of like dreading more than Pendulum. I go, I can get through this, no problem. Right. Hacks, I go, oh God, all right. Do I really want to feel like I hack squatted tomorrow? So
let's take it this way then. Let's take it that we could only pick one. So the smash will be the one that we would pick if we could only pick one out of the two. How about that?
So if it's current reality Pendulum, if I could be transported and not have knee issues, hack, just because all years of Widowmakers, I mean, come on. There's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, pun intended, on the machine.
Yep. And I think I'm right there with you. I have to smash the Pendulum, and I want to do them both too, because I still will do hacks. I train between 2 gyms. And when it comes to leg day, I almost consistently alternate for that reason. So that one leg workout, I can do Pendulums in the middle. And then the other one, I can use the Gen 1 Icarian hack squat. So I do go back and forth for that reason. I think they both, much like you, they both still have very good they're just great exercises to where I don't want to not do one, or I don't want to shelf one. But if I have to pick one, I'm going pendulum. I'm going pendulum all day. Not a question.
Yep, I completely agree with you.
On that note, let's segue into the fun, what do we call it? Intimate time with Dr. Marv and Skip. Excuse me. It's a new segment we just started last week for the last show. What we do is we ask each other 10 questions. So it's my turn today to field 10 questions from Dr. Marv, where the last show I asked Dr. Marv 10 questions, and it gives a little bit of insight into us outside of the industry, outside of the gym, outside of the 24/7 obsessive, all-consuming, industry that we work in.
The sweet music of love, we can no longer make.
So we think it'll be fun. We think it'll give you guys a little bit of insight. Hey, I didn't know Skip like that. I didn't know Dr. Marv like that. Oh, that's cool. I kind of like that too. Or, you know what? No one really gives a shit, guys. We just want to hear all this valuable information about training. So I hand it off to you, and it's important to note, we don't give a heads up to the other person of what these 10 questions are. And we're going to be quick. This isn't going to be like a 20-minute thing. We're going to be answering concisely. We're kind of moving through it as quickly as we can so that, it doesn't take a long time.
Yep. So I took the easy way out, everybody, and I asked ChatGPT for my first set of questions. I won't do that every week, but I was curious what ChatGPT would come up with. And one of them was the same question that you asked me. I just said, first 10 it gives me, I'm doing. So
it wasn't about the bisexual wife, was it?
No.
That's awesome. If AI was that good, that'd be impressive.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I did. Oh, if I said it's for Skip, then they might have, but I did not leave your name.
You never know.
All right. So number 1, what's a childhood memory that still makes you smile every time you think about it?
Playing baseball. My dad coached me for a lot of those years. He was a pretty good baseball player. Traded it for in fact, I turned down a 14-day tour of Japan to play 17 games when I was 17.
Japan!
Because, this is just so stupid in retrospect, I was going to miss workouts. And if I had it to do I have very, very few regrets in my 55 years. That's one of 2 of them. To trade that for workouts was just asinine. But at that time, baseball was sliding to the second place slot, and bodybuilding was the most important thing to me at that time.
Gotcha. All right. Number 2. So maybe you have the same answer. If you had to relive one day of your life on repeat, which day would it be and why?
A day. I got to tell you, and this is going to sound very cliche and maybe even an eye roll to people, but I have 4 kids, and I would say that honestly, those days rank right up there. Them being born type of thing. And I know that sounds very like, oh, come on, you got to have something more exciting than that. I've had a pretty exciting life, but
I think you would want to relive that day. I don't think your wife would want to relive that day on repeat.
Exactly, probably not. It was far less painful for me than it was for her. Yeah.
All right, number 3. What's the weirdest or most irrational fear you have?
Snakes. It's no question.
All right.
And I don't know why. I've never
Indiana Jones.
I tell you this is no shit. If I see a video on Instagram of a snake, I just saw one the other day, it creeps up to a baby in a hammock inside of a house, probably in fucking snake country, like in Australia or something. And the mom doesn't even notice it. And then all of a sudden she freaks out. I'm like, gosh, why is she freaking out? There's a giant snake. And I had a dream that night about snakes.
God.
That's it's irrational. And it's the only thing that heights a little bit. Snakes, crocodiles, spiders. I don't care about anything else. Snakes, horrible.
Yeah.
Next question.
If your life had a soundtrack, what song would be playing during your most epic moment?
Just like it has for the last 15, 18 years when I train legs, religiously till I collapse.
All right.
It is just so apropos.
Yep.
That
was one of my triathlon training songs.
Oh, okay.
A long time ago.
Love it.
What's something you've never admitted publicly, but it's totally harmless?
I'm a pretty private guy. Never admitted publicly, but it's harmless. And again, this is off the top of my head. I could probably think about this later and come up with something better, but I don't, and I say this to myself all the time. I've been married for 33 years. My wife is awesome, and she actually went back to work. So she's not here to hear, I'm not trying to set it up, make myself look good here. I think to tell her those things that you feel, but I'm not a terribly outwardly emotional, or like I don't verbalize my emotions. I am definitely an 80s, kid in that sense. I'm guarded, but yet I've changed that with my kids. So I would say that I need to say the things that I'm thinking to my wife, even though she probably almost 100% knows I don't say it.
Number 6, if you could have dinner with any fictional character, who would it be and what would you ask them?
Fictional. I'm not a fiction guy. I actually loathe which is weird when you think about it. But I have not seen Game of Thrones. I have not seen any Harry Potter. I've not seen anything like that. I watched Speed when the bus jumped the bridge with no incline. I turned it off. I'm like, that just can't happen. And Keanu Reeves is a shitty actor, so I don't want to watch this. Fictional. I don't know. Can I change it to some real?
Those are the rules.
I know.
You
can't
gotta
change
answer.
it, right? My own rule. My own
You
rule. Just bit
created
me
the
in the
rules.
ass.
Yeah.
Okay, fictional. I'm gonna go with Quagmire.
Okay. There we go. Yeah.
Giggity. Giggity.
There you go.
All right.
What's a small random act of kindness you've done that no one knows about?
I don't think people would know that I am especially in my latter years, I'm a pretty compassionate guy, probably because I was cold in my younger years. I like to, I did this a lot in Colorado, small town. I like to go up. I used to like to go up to the counter and tell the lady, and we always went here for breakfast. Country Road. It was awesome. Just a lot of memories there and stuff. Anyway, I would pick up all the open tabs for the breakfast.
Mm-hmm.
And I always told her, and she always knew, don't tell them who did it, because I don't want people coming. Cool. That's not why I'm doing it.
Yep.
And I would tip them too. There might be, one day there might be 6, the next day there might be, or the next time we went, there might be 11. But I always liked that. And one day I had lingered outside because we were on our motorcycles and we were talking to somebody, and a lady came out, and she came up to me, and I knew I didn't recognize her. And she walked up, she goes, I know you're not going to tell me, but I know you picked up our bill for breakfast, and I just thought that was really nice. And she walked away. And awesome. It's a good feeling. I like things like that.
Yeah, I dig it. Okay, same question you asked me. If you woke up tomorrow with a completely different profession, not fitness related, what would it be?
Advertising.
Okay.
I see commercials on TV, and I just like the creativity. Obviously not the things like Twix commercials where it's stupid, but I see why they're effective, because they're stupid. Or the Skittles commercial, it's raining, whatever. I like the wit of it, or even writing for SNL or something like that. That would be a dream job of mine. I could even go as far as to say stand up, but that's so out of my.
Yeah.
I have a lot of respect for people, really good storytelling, people who can write well. And I love writing, that. I'm, at least in bodybuilding, a bit prolific. I've written for years and years and years in the bodybuilding industry. Love it.
I'm glad your wife's not here. What's the most awkward or embarrassing date experience you've ever had?
I don't know that. I'm married for 33 years, so dating, going out maybe. I remember bumping into one of her ex-boyfriends who was a longtime boyfriend when she, understand we've been together for 33 years, and I met her when she had just turned 18. So this would have been maybe 2021. We're talking years ago. And bumped into this guy, and he was a douchebag. He treated her horribly bad. And that was memorable because I remember thinking, I know so much about you, and I know how much of a shitbag you are, and you deserve to be punched in the mouth. But I was smart enough to know at that time that even those shitty experiences that my wife had with him that impacted her to where she was the type of person that I was glad, is selfish as it sounds, not glad that those things happened to her, but it helped to create the person that she was, that I ended up, that I'm so happy with for 33. She's just such an awesome, most level-headed, coolest, funniest person that I know. And there's nobody I know that's more level-headed and more calm and logical, sensical than she is. Wanted to punch that motherfucker in the mouth, just like, not even not even say anything, just wham.
Just swing, yep. All right, last one on the hot seat. If you had to swap lives with a celebrity for 24 hours, who would it be, and what's the first thing you would do?
The Rock. Yeah, you know,
You getting up for a 4 a.m. workout? Is that what you're saying?
That I might not like. Considering I don't go to bed until 6 a.m. I'm working all night. But to me, that type of life, and obviously this guy's busting his balls, but training at that age and being not only just the obvious, like the money and everything else, but that celebrity famous, that I'd like to see what it's like for a day. I might not like it after a day and be like, okay, I'm cool with Skip being chill,
Yeah.
But I would, and I think talking to him, he seems like probably a relatively down to earth guy. We could probably, he skip loads clearly based on the French toast that he used. So he would probably want to ask me questions because I'm pretty sure he would respond and be like, if he's interviewed on TV, he'd probably be like, I want to meet Skip. We have so many parallels, and the skip loading is just so brilliant.
Awesome. Very well done. Okay, so I think we could get through those 2 questions quickly. Yep. I think we will save that third topic maybe for a main topic because it is a very deep dive that I think could help a lot of people. I know we're speaking very in code right now. I think somebody asked you about the bracing on your YouTube, of the bracing strategy that we went over of, do people do it for every lift? The answer is yes. Now, of course, you don't have to brace as much for, say, an arm curl as, say, a deadlift, but the same exact bracing strategy comes into play. The only time that is different is if you are somebody who does the powerlifting high arch bench strategy. That's for powerlifting specifically. Then no, you're going to breathe differently, but that's really the only scenario where you wouldn't want to maximally breathe and brace like I taught. Now, if you have, like we talked about, an active disc herniation and you're having those symptoms of electrical shooting signals down your legs, if you're bearing down and bracing hard, no, you wouldn't do it. But moral of the story is every movement in the gym, you're trying to keep that abdomen pressed out, breathe, keep it pressed out the entire time. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, I gave away one of my biggest secrets that I could guarantee no matter who somebody is, if they come into the office and I work with them for a period of time, I guarantee we can make them stronger. It's not a egotistical statement. It's just a statement I have seen come true time and time again. And it's not my own approach, right? It's not like I came up with it. I just know how to incorporate a bunch of stuff. It is that of DNS, dynamic neuromuscular stabilization. Listen to the squat episode for instructions of how to do that.
And you know that I responded saying, okay, I'm going to answer this, but I want to leave this for Dr. Marv because I didn't want to be wrong. I was thinking of things like lat pulls or whatever, but then I kind of went back on the fact that I'm like, you know what? I can't think of it as an example. One of the cues that I've always given my clients is it really doesn't matter what you're doing. It's ass out, chest out. Like that's just it's very rudimentary and it's not terribly detailed, but it's a cue that you're not going to go wrong with 99% of the time whether you're doing curls or whether you're doing a chest press or an overhead, a side lateral, overhead press, things like that. So I'm glad that we're on the same page with that. I'm always careful to make sure that when I respond that I'm in my wheelhouse and that I'm not giving incorrect information. And you know what? I'm no angel, but I wish more people would be aware of that. Because a lot of people just want to answer and they want to they just want to respond, even though they may not have the correct answer or they're almost guessing. And that's kind of the world of the internet, quite frankly.
Yes. And then we had one more, right? I can't remember. Do you have it pulled up?
I don't know if I do. Let's see.
It was essentially the guy was talking about, or gal, I don't know who it was. They back squat at the end of their workout to train their stabilizers.
Yes.
Is that the gist of it?
Yes, that was the one.
Okay, I have strong opinions on that, but I'll let you field this first. But I could talk a little bit real quickly about like some science and some benefits of doing something else at the end, but we'll have to be quick.
Okay, fair enough. I'll be as brief and concise as possible. I do like to finish with something like that because the major muscles that you've trained, especially when you're done training legs, if you go into, even like a barbell squat or even a lunge, for that matter. And quite frankly, I prefer the lunge for stabilizing stuff at that point because everything else is fatigue. So I'm not really doing that last exercise for size and hypertrophy. It's more of the stabilizer. That's why I'm so big on the lunges. So I'd rather do the lunges because they're one leg at a time. So I believe that there's more stabilizer work done in a movement like that that's isolateral versus even something like a barbell squat. Not that it's not there, but I think that it's in that stabilizer work is increased doing something like an isolateral lunge.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think a lunge is vastly superior. So what does the research say? Stabilizers, muscles, they still have to work in a machine, but you're going to have less peak neural drive or activation, in a machine movement versus a free weight movement. We already know this. My concern is, are you creating just a ton of fatigue without providing a huge muscle building stimulus like you just talked about? So like you, I like the general idea, but I would much rather finish with a lunge or, heaven forbid, a split squat, because we are designed to, how did our ancestors survive? It's kind of dark, so I'm sorry, PETA, but we walked animals to death. That's what we did. We have no claws. We have shit teeth. We walked animals till they overheated. That's why we're the only species with a curve in our lumbar spine, right? So I do think, we do so much bilateral training in the gym because it's time efficient. And I think as you get stronger and or bigger, I've kind of talked about this before, the concept of you start to get compressed in your rib cage, compressed in your pelvis. And we start to all of a sudden turn into that block, right? That refrigerator movement where you're no longer fluid. It looks really awkward. It's like, dude, do you have any semblance of motion? Right. So I do think doing a unilateral movement at the end of the workout is a great way to restore some of that balance, especially rotation, because we lose some of the natural rotation that'll happen. That was supposed to happen. We're doing all bilateral stuff. And here's something cool that people don't realize. Unilateral movements in strength will translate to bilateral strength, but bilateral strength does not translate to unilateral strength. Nice. Mm-hmm. And so I'm always going to try to finish, especially if it's somebody who's bigger, they've been in the game a long time, they're beat up like me, right? Because I'm not big, is some unilateral leg work or some sort of rotational movement at the end of an upper day, just to restore some of that motion, because we get in this box, we don't move out of this box going straight up and down, and that can cause a lot of issues long term.
Yeah, and I can't agree more. I'm 100% on. I think that, and I think you probably would agree as well, that the fact that we do so much more machine or fixed machine training these days than we did 25 years ago, where, 25, 30 years ago, it was so much more free weight, so much more stabilization work. I think it's even more important now to make sure that you have some exercises programmed to make sure that you still are doing stabilizer work. Otherwise, you could arguably have very, very strong prime movers and very weak or much weaker stabilizers. And that's a recipe for injury at some point.
Absolutely.
So on that note, I'm going to take us out, Dr. Marv. Kind of a, I say weird, but a different show today. I yelled at my Bengal, thought that my mic was muted. My wife dropped in real quick, so it's a little bit different. Sometimes these things happen. Hope you guys enjoyed the show. If you did, be sure to like, subscribe, share, and ring the bell. It'll sound a little something like this. And if you didn't, let's see, I got to make sure that I have that off. There we go. Yeah, if you didn't like the show, just pretend that you did. Like, subscribe, share, and ring the bell anyway. We want to hear your questions and your feedback about the show in the comments section. And remember, if you comment, you go into the drawing at the end of the month for Team Skip shirt of your choosing and Dr. Marv's online anatomy course as well. If we get some good questions, of course, we're going to answer them during the show, just like we did today. Answer 2 of them today. So we'll do 2 or 3 pretty much every show. If you have a topic or specific exercise you'd like us to discuss, let us know. We'll add it to the list. Be sure to use the True Nutrition link in the closing credits to save 10% on not just Team Skip protein, but every supplement they sell. Not only do I use Team Skip protein with my clients, but other top prep guys have their clients use my protein as well because it's that good. Dr. Marv, how can people reach out to you with questions or if they want to hire you?
So I'm most active on Instagram on my personal page at dr.marvin.saysdc. I also have the educatedmehead.com. My chiro office is in Houston Bay Area. This comes out after the fact, but I'm doing my next paid seminar Saturday that will be turned into another online course, everything you need to know about squats. So be on the lookout for that. I do not work one-on-one with anybody because I'm too busy. So reach out to Skip, but I do have workout programs, consultations, stuff like that.
Very cool. If you have too much skin, go to teamskip.com. You'll find all my contact information there, including Team Skip merch. And of course, you can follow me on Instagram at Intense Muscle as well. Join us again next week for another episode of Between Two Dumbbells.